Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we are going to get into consumer marriages. So this primarily stems from a video put out by Bill Doherty, and he is a pretty well-known marriage therapist. And so he released this YouTube video that I will have linked in our show notes, and it's called The Consumer Culture of Marriage. Now, he also talks about this more in depth in a book that I will also have referenced in our show notes. And that book is Take Back Your Marriage, Sticking Together in a World That Pulls Us Apart, which is also by Bill Doherty. And there's a lot of good stuff in that book that I like. I read that book for a class, and so it's got a lot of really great stuff on marriage. And today we're going to focus on consumer marriages, and we're going to explain what that is and why that's problematic.
I really like Bill's stuff. I mean, he's, way back when I was getting started and thinking about doing a lot of relationship counseling, he's probably the first guy I listened to and read, I think, because he's been around a long time. Here's my big complaint. Okay. You're going to laugh.
Okay, let's hear it.
He's doing this video in his home.
Uh-huh.
I think his taste in artwork is terrible.
I don't like his artwork.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, see, it's all lines, and anyway, people who watch this will see what I mean. My eyes kept going, I mean, he's right there front and center, and he's talking, and I kept going, why would you choose that to be in your home? Anyway,
so I was taking notes on the video, so I wasn't even paying attention to the background. I was just listening. Okay. I was barely watching, but that's really funny.
Anyway, so listeners, tell me what you think about this artwork. Anyway, go ahead. Consumer marriage.
All right. So I am just going to start out because I am almost positive this book is going to come up, because every time we talk about relationships, we discuss Robin Smith's Lies at the Altar.
Oh, okay.
So 276 questions to ask before you get married. Always important to do. That's probably our most referenced ever. Like, we probably reference that more than anything else in this podcast, just because they're great questions to talk about. Like, if you're considering marriage, or if you're even considering moving in with somebody, taking this next big step in a relationship, these are very detailed questions that you can ask. They're going to foster great conversations, great dialogue. And it's just a really great way to get to know your partner in a way that you might not have, in a way that you hadn't thought to before.
Yeah, and our listeners know I like that book. But here's a problem with it, is if you think you're going to know or learn and know everything about your partner, then that's not going to happen. That's not true. So I think once we talk about what consumer marriage is, and some of the examples, which I think you've put in our outline, is some of the examples that Bill Doherty goes over. And then I'm going to tie it back into how, like, that particular issue may not come up, even if you've gone over, all the 276 questions and Lies at the Altar. And so there has to be some flexibility.
Yeah.
We change through the lifespan. Yeah. We're dynamic through the lifespan. And he doesn't address that in his video, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Do you want to explain what consumer culture of marriage is?
Yeah, so let's start there. Consumer culture in general, is just, we buy things to make us happy. And I'm not trying to cast that in a negative light, because there's nothing wrong with buying yourself something that you like or that you want. That's perfectly fine. The thing is these consumer goods that you're purchasing, they're dispensable, like, they're disposable. They're not going to last. They're probably not going to last a lifetime. Eventually, if you get sick of it or if you get bored with it, you move on to something else. And now, as you can probably guess, that's a really big problem to treat your marriage that way. Not very effective.
But I'll go ahead and say something negative about consumer culture. I think that because what he points out in the video is that advertising is all about taking a want and shifting it in your mind to make it a need.
Yes.
I need this. And I think that's the problem. Like, I don't have any problem with people advertising like, we sell this or we sell that. Yeah. But and I didn't even think of this, but I don't know, back in the early 1900s, I think, and it's a psychologist, and I'm going to say William James, but that's probably not accurate. Anyway, it was a psychologist who he worked in Baltimore
Hmm.
at a university, had an affair with a grad student, got
Hmm.
kicked out, needed something to do, ended up in New York. He brought psychology to advertising
Hmm.
and made a huge difference. And so the way advertisers get you to shift from, the want to the need is actually built on these psychological principles that were
Yeah.
certainly started by this psychologist a long, long time ago. And so I just think we have to be careful of the culture. Now, I'm not talking about marriage because we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But even as consumers, I think it's part of the problem is that we think we need the latest iPhone, right?
Hmm.
I need this iPhone. I mean, you're quite a bit younger than I am, but I grew up, I didn't have a cell phone till, I don't know, in my 30s, maybe.
Right.
I mean, we got along just fine.
Yep. Yep.
And we did not need the cell phone. None
Yeah.
of my kids had cell phones except my youngest when he was a senior in high school. So that's what advertising does. That's what
Hmm.
Bill Doherty is referring to, is the idea that advertising takes wants, which are pretty normal. I agree with you.
Hmm.
I would like this, but shifts it into I need that.
Yeah. And that is a problem. And and again, if you've got the funds and you see something and you want to buy it, it's not like that's a bad thing. But, you know, a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck, right?
Right.
Or, they're
And they
not,
don't have the funds.
yeah, they don't manage it because they're convinced that they need this.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't have the funds to do that, and they still think they need it. And so they
Mm.
either go into debt or
Yep.
maybe don't buy the food they need or the health care they need to
Hmm.
get the newest gadget.
Right. And consumer marriage, so the way that Bill Doherty describes this is oftentimes we get into this comparison problem. Now, and the minute you start comparing your marriage to someone else's marriage, you're in dangerous waters and you need to stop that immediately.
So what do you think I'm going to mention now? Because I agree with you. Where are you most likely to compare yourself to?
Oh, your friend?
Social media.
Oh, social media. Okay, you're
This
right.
is my
Yeah.
big this is my big complaint about
Hmm.
one of my big complaints about social
Yeah.
media. You go
Yeah.
on Facebook and what you see is the happy couple, they're off on their vacation to Maui or wherever they are, or they're talking about what my spouse did this wonderful thing for my birthday. It's because what you see on social media is not necessarily not accurate. Sometimes it
Hmm.
is, often it's not. And
Yeah.
so I agree it's comparison.
Yeah. And a quote that I really like comes from Theodore Roosevelt. Comparison is the thief of joy. And, I think we know that there are a lot of problems with social media, and there are some positives, there are some good things, right? It
Right.
can be
I agree with that.
a great way for connection, but the biggest problem is comparison, right? And so, and you see this in every facet of life, right? I mean, and what I try to help people see, or the way I kind of look at it is you are seeing one tiny snapshot, one
Right.
picture perfect snapshot. You are not
Yep.
getting the whole picture. And I also don't think that it's wrong to talk about your spouse in a positive light on Facebook, right? So I don't want to discourage that from people. I don't think it's wrong to celebrate, right? I mean, you're sharing things with people, and that's not a bad thing to
No,
share
I agree with
positive.
you. It's not a
Yeah,
bad thing.
to
But
share
the
positive
problem
things.
comes in the comparison.
Yes, but when you start comparing your life, oh man, I wish my husband would do sweet romantic things
Right.
like that.
Right. Right.
Well, that's the like don't do that. That's just you're
But
asking to be unhappy when you do that.
right. And I hadn't heard that quote from Theodore Roosevelt. I really like it. I
Mhm.
think that's true. Comparison is the thief of joy. And so, you may, as Doherty points out in this video, you may have a perfectly happy marriage
Yeah.
that then you start thinking about your wants as needs, which we'll
Mhm.
get into in a little more detail, but your wants as needs, and then comparing yourself to, the couple next door, then you start to be unhappy
Yeah.
when you were probably pretty happy.
Mhm. this is something I definitely went through a few years into my marriage. I had this group of stay-at-home mom friends, and we all sat around and we talked a lot. We got to know each other very well, and we got to, so I mean, obviously we knew a lot about each other's lives, and we talked about our spouses a lot. I started to fall into this trap of, man, I wish Curtis was more like that.
Mhm.
And, I'm so glad that I got out of that, because that is I agree with Bill Doherty 100%. That is a really quick way to blow up a happy marriage, is if you start wishing your husband or your spouse, your wife, was more like that. I wish my partner
Yeah.
was more like their partner.
Yeah.
You're not married to their partner, you're married to your partner, or you're in a relationship with your partner. And so, I think you need to focus on the positive, right? And that's really what I started to do. That's how I got myself out of that comparison, and that, oh, I wish Curtis was more like this. Is I said, nope, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't sound happy. That's not going to make me happy. So I'm going to focus on all of the things about Curtis that I love. And I think that's what you need to do, is you need to just focus on, what are the things that my spouse does that I do love? Or better yet, what can I do to make my spouse happy? How can
Yeah.
I make my spouse happy? How can I be the change I want to see in our relationship? Those are
Mhm.
much healthier avenues than just focusing on what you think you should have from your spouse.
Yeah. So I'm going to go into maybe a couple of things in the
Hmm.
video, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And these are things that I have certainly encountered in my office with couples. And so what I hear often from people is they use the word need all the time.
Hmm.
I need you to do this. I need you to do that. And I try and help them change the word,
Yeah.
because often need implies, if I don't get this, I'm going to die or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a need.
Yeah.
It's a
Hmm.
lot stronger than a want. And so words have meaning. And I think what I try and help couples do is shift the word that you're using, just move away from need and go back to want. And it's easier to listen to.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about hearing that, if Curtis comes to you and says, Liz, I need you to do this or something, that it feels like a demand.
Hmm.
Whereas if you shift the word to, I like this or I want this, then it's softer and in my
Yeah.
mind. And,
Hmm.
and it doesn't imply, something terrible is going to happen if I don't get. Now, one of the things he talks about, he mentions specifically that one partner, usually the female in the relationship, will say, well, I want my husband to be more emotionally connected to
Hmm.
me. And so that's the one that really stuck out to me, is I disagree with that in this context,
Yeah.
because often when a couple is together, and so we're talking about a typical heterosexual relationship, although this may happen in same-sex relationships as well.
Hmm.
But in a
Yeah.
heterosexual relationship, there's something going on. I mean, we've talked about this in past episodes with the hormones, the novelty, all of it, you're brand new. And often the guy is very talkative, right? So the female gets into this relationship with this man who she thinks is very talkative. And in fact, that is her experience with him. And then, over time, the hormones change. It's not so novel anymore. You're married, you have 3 kids, and
Yep.
the husband is retreating into his man cave, which
Uh-huh.
is probably more his, the baseline for his behavior. Usually
Right.
it's probably that. So I think when she comes and says, now I wouldn't use the word need. I would help her to not use the word need.
Yeah.
I would like us to be more emotionally connected. It's
Hmm.
different than saying, I need us to be more emotionally connected. I don't think that to me, that doesn't fall into this category of the consumer culture, because I think as a species, I think even men, when they learn how to do this, like it,
Yeah.
typically like being more emotionally connected. And so I see it more as kind of an inherent in who we are,
Hmm.
not that, oh, I saw the neighbors doing this, so that's what I want.
Right.
I see this more as, I experienced this with you, you know, 15
Hmm.
years ago, and I'd really
Yeah.
like it to come back. So could we
Yeah.
work on getting that back? And then tying this back into Robin Smith and Lies at the Altars, I don't know of any question that's going to really dig into that piece.
Yeah.
Like, are you going how do you feel about emotional connection? I don't think that's in there, because
Hmm.
you'd have to do a whole thing on what is emotional connection. So
Yeah.
that my point is around, because this is probably the most common issue that I see
Mhm.
in couples. I think it's the most common issue, and so that's not going to be covered in a question. And typically, they experience being close emotionally at the start of their relationship, and they just aren't now. So how do you get it back? So that's
Yeah.
my one disagreement. But the way I threw out this topic, the consumer marriage, often what I see too is if you have someone who's kind of selfish, which that
Mhm.
they're selfish people who get married, certainly. But
Mhm.
if they're really just looking for a way to get their needs met, like it's all about them,
Mhm.
that to me often feels like it falls into this
Yeah.
category of consumer culture of marriage. Is that, and so it kind of ties back into what you just said, is that one of the ways out of it is to look at what can I do for my partner? Not
Mhm.
so you're shifting it from what can my partner give to me,
Yeah.
what can I give to my partner?
Relationships are all about give and take. And I think it's impossible to be in a relationship and not take some, right? Because I mean, if you're, especially if you have kids or just if you're in an emotionally dependent relationship, which is, and I'm talking about a healthy dependent
Mm-hmm.
relationship, you're dependent on each other, there's going to be some take. But relationships have to be way more give than they are take. And mutual given,
Mm-hmm.
right? Mutual giving, right? Because
Yeah.
if you are trying to be more giving to your spouse than you are taking from your spouse, then you are both going to be happier and have more fulfillment. And also keep in mind that it's going to shift, right? There's going to be times where you are going to be taking more. That is going to happen. Like, for example, maybe you're really sick and you don't feel good. Well, then you might be taking a lot, but hopefully you have a good enough relationship and you have a good emotional bank account, as we've called it before, in that it's okay for you to make this heavy withdrawal and your spouse is willing and saying, "Oh, you don't feel good. Let me take over for today.
Mm-hmm.
Let me take up all the things today and you can just rest and relax." Right?
Right.
So that's an important part of a relationship is making sure you are giving more than you are taking.
I agree. This is a bit of an aside, but it made me think of occasionally I will see a situation where this doesn't necessarily happen with males or females more often, but one of them, because of family of origin issues, they have a really difficult time receiving or taking
Mm,
from the other person. And that is also problematic because the other person wants to give. I mean, part of the relationship that back and forth is I'm going to give to you and it feels good to me to give to you. And so
yeah.
if you're one of those people who have a really hard time having your spouse do nice things for you or give to you, that's
Mhm.
also problematic.
Mhm.
And so it goes back to it's never going to be totally equal, but
No.
you have to be able to give and you also have to be able to receive the good thing
Yeah.
that your partner gives to you.
We talked about this idea of marriage should always be 50-50, and that's just not reality. I mean, there's going to be some days where your spouse only
Yeah.
has 10% to give,
Yeah.
and you've got
That's
to
me
step.
today, by the way, in my marriage. Because I'm not feeling well. I got food poisoning, so I've only got about 10% to give. And Lindy, I mean, so we're laying in bed before we got up, and she was tickling my back and rubbing my head. She went on doing that for at least a half hour. It was very nice. So she was giving, giving, giving.
Because you guys have a relationship.
Yeah,
And I'm sure
yeah,
there's been times in your marriage where Lindy's given maybe
yeah,
just 5% and
yeah,
you happily
yeah,
picked up the slack. And so I mean, that's, I think, what marriage is all about. We've talked about this before is that if you're not willing to be dependent on somebody, then why would you bother being married? Right.
yeah.
I mean, it's good to be committed and to depend on somebody. And I like what you said. That really resonates with me. It feels good to do for somebody else. It feels good to give nice things and do nice things for your spouse.
This isn't a big thing. I'm going to throw out a different word. I think interdependent
Interdependent. Okay.
is what I
I
like
like
because
that.
that implies you're both dependent on each other. See, if I say I'm dependent on you, then a lot of people have trouble with that, thinking, oh, well, you shouldn't be dependent on the other person. But really, I think marriages are interdependent
And
more
I
than anything.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. So something that you said really made me think about it is, you have a hard time with your spouse doing and giving for you. that
Hmm.
made me think of moms who are so used to running the household and they want it done a specific way that
Yep.
they have a hard time relinquishing control and letting their husbands help.
That
Now,
is very true.
yeah.
Yeah.
And, for some couples, that's fine and that works. And if that's the case, if you can do it and if you have a natural division of labor and that works for you, that's great because I've seen that before in some couples. But, if you are exhausted or you're just really vulnerable and you need help or you would like help, you've got to learn to be okay with the fact that maybe the laundry didn't get put away the way you would have done it and ask yourself, did it get done?
Yeah, see, that's the extension to that is that often it's
Mm,
not that just I want my spouse to help, it's I want my spouse to do it in this very specific way.
yeah.
That's what I think you need to move away from to be able to say, well, it got done
Yeah.
and that's
One
good
que-
enough.
one question I try to ask myself as often as I can is, am I going to care about this in 1 month from now? How
Right.
about 5 years from now? How about 10 years from now? Right? Like, ask yourself, 10 years from now, are you really going to care about the way the dishes were done, loaded in the dishwasher?
See, it
And
doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter
yeah,
like 30 minutes after that. I told you, I
exactly.
think I've mentioned on the in a previous episode. Honest, we spent with a couple at least half the session talking about the direction of the towels in the towel cupboard.
Yeah.
It,
It wasn't about the towels so
I
much.
even pointed this out. I said, yeah, it's not about the towels, but you two are so focused on the
Uh-huh.
towels have to be this way or that way. And see, like that, there's so many things in
Yeah.
our lives
Mm-hmm.
that ultimately don't matter that
Yeah.
much. They really
Yeah.
don't. And
Mm-hmm.
so if we attach this huge importance to how the towels are, or this huge importance to how the dishes go in the dishwasher, then that's going to be a difficult time
Mm-hmm.
because you're a bit rigid is the word I would use.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think flexibility is a big part of the give and take in marriage. And maybe if it does really matter to you, if it is something that is important to you, hopefully you can kind of have a dialogue about that and just step back and
Yeah.
say to your spouse, this is important to me and here's why. Is it okay if we do it this way instead? And then and that's going back into conflict resolution, which we've discussed before. So
Yeah.
going back into this idea of consumer marriage. So the example that really stuck out to me was the cycling one because I
Uh-huh.
mean,
Yeah.
I'm a cyclist. And, because, and he said, maybe you're convinced that you need a spouse who would join the cycling club with you or who would do this sport, or maybe it's a new religion or, a new hobby or something, and you want your spouse to join you and it's not their thing and they don't. But I also want to push back a little bit and say there's nothing wrong with asking or with discussing this. And
Right. That's using the word I want. I like you say, Curtis, I really want you to come and do this with me, as opposed to Curtis, I really need you to come and go cycling too.
exactly.
Those are very different statements.
Yes. Yeah. And so, if you do get a new passion or a new hobby, and I'm fortunate enough that Curtis did join me in cycling. So that worked out great. And it's become something we've both really come to love doing together. But, if he hadn't, he loves me enough and he's supportive enough that, you know, I would just keep cycling. I would still cycle. Right. And
Yeah.
so, you mentioned early on, we're dynamic through the lifespan. And so we're going to change. Our interests are going to
Yes.
change. Our
Yep.
focuses are going to shift. That's very normal and that's very natural. And so that can be difficult to navigate in some instances. I think religion is probably maybe can be one of the trickier ones because oftentimes religion is an entire lifestyle. But, again,
Right.
if you're really committed to this relationship and you're committed to your partner and you really love them, you're going to be okay with the idea that they're into this new hobby or they have this new thing. And hopefully you're going to at least engage with them some. If it's not your thing, that's okay.
Yeah.
But show an interest because you love your spouse, you love your
Yeah.
partner.
Here's something that I have run into, often, and that
Hmm.
is let's take mountain biking. Mountain biking is really big here.
Hmm.
I don't know. What you do is road biking, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so mountain
Yeah.
biking, I find a lot of men usually who are really into mountain biking and they go 100% into this thing, right? Fast, whatever. I've never done it. It's too scary.
Hmm.
And they want their wives to join them. Now, their wives might be open to it, but not on the same level. You know,
Mm,
like,
yeah.
maybe the wife would love to go riding on trail and give it, 20, I don't know what kind of level, but, not
Yeah. Yeah.
100%. And so what I try and help the man to see is that sometimes you could do what I call relationship mountain biking,
Yes.
meaning meaning
Mm-hmm.
you're focused on the relationship while you're mountain biking. And then when your spouse isn't there, you can go, full out 100%. But there are
Mm-hmm.
times when well, actually, maybe most of the time, the relationship is important, most important. And
Yeah.
so if you want to go riding with your spouse, bring your level down. I found that with running, walk. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, a lot of things that people do. That yeah, I want to run, but I have to, really fast.
Yeah.
But that's just something to consider. If you do want to have common interests, you may have to change the level of
Mm-hmm.
your interest with your spouse.
Yeah, absolutely. Any sort of engagement that they do with you, maybe it's just talking about it, right? And they're listening. Like, oh, I had this really great mountain bike and we did all these really cool things and we had so much fun and I got a PR. I accomplished something. And if your spouse is just actively engaged and they're listening and they're communicating with you, that counts, right? So don't
Right.
discount that. That is your spouse taking an interest in you.
Did you just use a biking term? What's PR?
Oh, personal record.
Oh, okay. I had no idea.
It's a sports term, but yeah, no,
Okay.
PR.
Sports term, PR.
Yeah, PR. No, I mean the biking term would be a KOM, king or KOM,
What's a K? What?
king of the mountain. It means you're the
Oh,
fastest
okay.
one to get up the mountain. Those are
Okay.
yeah, that's a huge thing in the cycling world is
Okay.
being king of the mountain. You're the
Right.
fastest up the
So,
mountain. But
so when you're doing it alone, it's great to go try and be the KOM. But
uh-huh.
if you're with your spouse, maybe you just want to hang back and talk.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm Curtis and I are going to be doing that this year. So I've got this big ride that one of my sponsors for my cycling team is doing. And so our coach is like, I really need people to turn out for this ride. But it's the same weekend as our anniversary.
Hmm.
And so thankfully I don't have to race the ride. Like I can ride it and just go at a chill pace. Like I just need
Yeah.
to, I just need to be there. And so I'm going to scale back and do it with Curtis. And we're looking forward to spending our anniversary biking because cycling
Yeah.
is something we've both really, really come to love. And it's something we love doing together. And so, we're going to do this really cool, fun ride for our anniversary. And so, it's a great compromise. And so that give and take in a relationship, again, it's important.
Yeah.
Okay. So next week, we are going to get into teens and privacy. This is a little bit of a continuation into family secrets. So we kind of maybe discuss this a little bit in the episode, but for time constraints, I had to cut most of our discussion about teens. So we want to just do an entire episode about teenagers and kind of that fine line you have to walk of letting them have their autonomy and also you're responsible for their safety.
Right. It's tricky. So good. We're going to
Teens
talk about it.
teens are really tricky. I'm like dipping my toes into that water. Our
Uh
oldest just turned 11 and she's about to start wearing makeup. She's
huh.
getting really into clothes and she's got all these opinions about what she wants to wear and so yeah, I'm dipping my toes into that realm.
You're
So
in that tween. Isn't that what they call tween?
yeah, yeah, I've got a
Okay.
tween and
Tween.
it's tricky. So, and I also wanted to note and apologize for Mark and I being out week before last.
That was my fault.
Yeah, Mark had some health issues going on, and then
Yeah.
yeah, it's just it's the holiday season, and so you know what? If we don't do an episode one week, it's
Right.
okay,
It's
right?
okay.
And
See,
yeah,
because flexibility is the hallmark of a healthy mind.
that's
There
right.
you go.
Flexibility. Good way to tie it all in and wrap up
Right.
the episode in a neat way. I also want to apologize to anybody who has tried to reach out to me via email. I am working on getting caught up on the podcast emails between finals for me, holidays, a hospital visit with my son. It has been chaotic to
Been
say the
busy.
least. Yes, busy, busy, busy. So if you have reached out, I apologize. I'm working on it and I will respond to that just as soon as I can. But maybe expect the new year because it's busy.
Yeah. Have a good
right.
week, everyone.
Yeah, we'll see y'all next week. Bye, guys. Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.